I will read today just the first four verses of Proverbs from the CSB version. But before I do, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. So let's start. Chapter 7 starts off with my son. Obey my words and treasure my commands. Keep my commands and live and guard my instructions as you would the pupil of your eye. Tie them to your fingers, write them on the tablet of your heart. Say to wisdom, you are my sister, and call understanding your relative. She will keep you from a forbidden woman, a wayward woman with her flattering talk. Now, I just read verse 1 through 5 in chapter 7. And so, speaking the right words in any given situation, it's a simple task. I call it fluff and stuff. People can speak eloquently with a lot of fluffy words, words that have no sustenance and words that have no meaning. I remember hearing as a child, actions speak louder than words. And that is true. Our actions speak louder than words. I mean, we hear of Missouri as the show me state. Show me. Don't just tell me. Show me. Show me with your words. And when you put action behind your words, they have more meaning, right? But truly acting upon them, um, is where the real challenge lies. It's easy to say something that sounds good and to receive the approval of others. But the true measure of our words, as I said before, is in our actions. And it demonstrates that we generally mean what we say. When I was growing up, my mom, she would tell us, you better stop doing such and such or I'm going to get you. We were going to get a spanking or something. And we would, my sister and I, sometimes we would test her. As kids, you test your parents because you figure, oh, they're just talking. It's just hot air until they act on those words. And then, the kid realizes, oh, snap, they're serious. They mean what they're saying. It's not just fluff and stuff. They're not just speaking words. They're putting actions behind those words. And another wise thing my mother taught me was to be a woman of my word. If I said I was going to do something, to back it up and do it. And if I made a promise to someone and I wasn't able to keep that promise or I wasn't able to do something that I said I would do, then it was my responsibility to reach out to that person and say, hey, I know I said I would do ABC, but I'm unable to do it because of whatever, whatever. Things happen, things come up. But the key is to be a person of your word. So, wisdom is not something that can merely be obtained through intellectual understanding or good intentions, through reading books or taking 50 million classes or being in school all day. Wisdom comes from life experience. Wisdom, it requires actions, taking concrete steps to goals, like putting goals in place. What are your goals? What are your short term goals? What are your long term goals? How do you plan on putting those things into action? What are your action steps to those goals, right? So we may aspire to be faithful followers of Jesus, but unless we translate that aspiration, that desire into action and direction, it's not going to be of any use. It's just talking, right? Talking with empty words. So let us not be content with just mere intentions to do good, but rather let us take the necessary steps to walk in the wisdom of Jesus. All right. So there are many people um, who resist God's wisdom. because of the gap that can sometimes exist between acquiring wisdom and putting it into practice. Sometimes they just don't know. And they can find it difficult to come to terms with the fact that the things they say and the things they do don't line up, right? Solomon didn't want the wisdom that he gave his son to simply be a good idea. God's wisdom is far more than just a good idea. And Solomon was he was begging his sons to let the wisdom they received exceed intention, to the wisdom that they received to actually use it. And in this passage, in the first chapter, in 7, the first verse, verse 1 through 5, we can see a familiar plea that we've seen throughout the other days, in Proverbs, where Solomon is pleading his sons to listen, to understand, and to follow his teachings. He's repeating himself, saying, "Listen, listen to my teachings, follow my teachings. I know from firsthand experience. I know." And so the instructions consist of the Father's words, his commands, and his teachings. He advises his son to keep, to store, and to protect his teachings as if they were a treasure, as if they were gold. And he says, if they do so, they will lead a full and meaningful life. Solomon, he especially instructs his sons to guard his instructions as they would guard the pupil of their eye. Now, the pupil of our eye, it is the center of our eye, and it is the most sensitive part in our body. And most people, when something comes towards their face, what do? They protect their eyes, right? Because they don't want anything to come into their eyes. So if something happens with your eyes, you lose your eyesight, or you could cause damage to your cornea and retina, and so on and so forth. So you want to protect, like you protect your eyes, you want to protect the wisdom, you want to guard it and protect it and keep it like priceless treasure, okay, because it brings life, right? So we are to bind God's teachings, our Father's teachings, around our neck, to bind them like rings on our fingers and write them on our hearts, store them, hide them in our hearts. And he also says to treat wisdom like a relative. Now, during the Old Testament, one sister was considered to be an intimate relative. Sometimes a sister could be a wife, could be referred to as a sister. It's in, I'm not sure exactly where it is in Genesis, but in Genesis, there is a scripture that talks about Abraham with Pharaoh and telling Pharaoh that Sarah was his sister as opposed to his wife, because he didn't want um, to. I think now I'm not remembering this 100% correctly, but he didn't want to be killed or put in prison or what have you. So he lied to Pharaoh and said that Sarah was his sister. But when Pharaoh saw her and saw that she was beautiful, he wanted to take her for a concubine, not necessarily as a wife, but as a concubine, and make her part of his harem. And he was about to sleep with her, but God gave him a vision and said, "No, don't touch her." And he found out that Sarah was not Abraham's sister, she was his wife. And Pharaoh was about to sin against Abraham's God. And so a sister was close as a mother in those days. And we are to hold wisdom as close as our closest relative, as close as our closest kin, right? So we are to be familiar with wisdom in that sense. And the same is true of understanding or insight, which is to be like a relative. So um, In verse 6 through 9, Solomon speaks from a place of personal experience, of witnessing the consequences of giving in to temptation. And as the chapter talks about this man, this young man who was seduced by a temptress, and the outcome wasn't very good because he was walking down a dark alley, so to speak. There was no light; it was dark, and he failed to obey. This young man failed to obey and treasure God's wisdom, which he paid the ultimate price for not treasuring, holding close God's wisdom to his heart, for guarding his wisdom. He paid the ultimate price with his life. And so Solomon acknowledges that all of us, including his sons, we will be attracted to the forbidden things in life at some point in time throughout our life, especially as young people. So therefore, he emphasizes the importance of wisdom and how it should be guarded and practiced daily, and how God's instructions are not just good intentions or knowledge to possess, but life-giving treasure that we should choose to live by daily. So remember, keep and guard wisdom, bind it around your neck. Put it in your heart, store it in your heart like priceless treasure. Treat it like your closest relative. Live by God's wisdom, and you will have a full life. And we've mentioned this before. Life comes with trials, tribulations. We know that it is unavoidable. But if you guard your heart, and if you live by the wisdom that God is giving you will have a full life. I thank you for joining us today on day 7, 31 days of Proverbs. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And we will gather again tomorrow. Have a blessed day, and